The plate shattered against the marble floor, and every voice in the throne room died. Marcus Cole stood with his arms still extended, fragments of iridescent ceramic scattered at his feet, the purple liquid that had been meant as sacred wine now seeping into the ancient stone. Around him, 200 Valorian nobles stared in absolute horror, not at what he had done, but at the impossibility that he had done it at all. "Human," the High Steward's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You have committed sacrilege." Marcus didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on the Empress, who sat frozen on her crystalline throne, her silver skin catching the light of 1,000 floating lanterns. She was tall, impossibly elegant, with eyes like liquid gold that now held something he couldn't quite read. "The wine was poisoned," he said simply. A ripple of whispers spread through the assembled crowd. The nobles, draped in their ceremonial silks that shifted colors with their emotions, now bleeding into shades of outrage and shock, pressed closer. "Impossible," the High Steward declared. He was an ancient Valorian, his silver skin marked with the blue ceremonial tattoos of his office. "The sacred offering is blessed by the temple itself. No poison cud, thallium compound," Marcus interrupted. "Odorless, nearly colorless. But it reacts with the bioluminescent properties of Valorian sacred wine." There was a slight opacity shift. "Your people wouldn't notice it. Your visual spectrum doesn't catch it. But humans do." The Empress raised one slender hand, and the room fell silent again. "You are the human ambassador's servant," she said. Her voice was like wind through crystal chimes, beautiful, cold, distant. "The one they call the cultural attaché. I'm the one who carries the bags, your radiance." Marcus allowed himself a small, bitter smile. "Ambassador Chen doesn't consider me important enough for a real title. And yet you stand in my throne room having destroyed a sacred vessel, claiming to have saved my life. I don't claim anything." He finally lowered his arm. "I'm just telling you what I saw." The High Steward stepped forward, his ceremonial robes now fully crimson with rage. "This is clearly a human plot. He poisons the wine himself, then saves the Empress to gain favor. Execute him immediately." Several guards moved toward Marcus, their phase lances humming to life. He didn't run. He'd learned long ago that running only delayed the inevitable. "Wait." The single word from the Empress stopped everyone. She rose from her throne, and Marcus was struck again by how different she was from the propaganda images humanity received. The broadcast showed her as cold, imperious, the face of an empire that had dismissed humanity as barely worth acknowledging. But standing there, silhouetted against the great window that showed the spiraling galaxies beyond, she looked tired. "Bring the fragments," she commanded, "and summon the temple alchemist." The next hour was the longest of Marcus's life. He stood in the center of the throne room, surrounded by hostile stares, while the Empress's personal alchemist, a wizened Valorian woman whose skin had faded to pale gray with age, examined every shard of the broken plate, every drop of spilled wine. Ambassador Chen had arrived at some point, red-faced and furious, already composing apologies in his head. He'd positioned himself as far from Marcus as possible, clearly preparing to disavow any connection. Finally, the alchemist looked up. "Thallium 9, she announced, her voice cracking with age and something else, fear, perhaps. "Compound banned across the hegemony for 3,000 years. Lethal to our kind within hours. Undetectable by any conventional means." The silence that followed was different from before. This was the silence of a court realizing they had nearly watched their ruler die. A human shattered the poisoned plate before it reached the Empress, the High Steward said slowly, as if trying to process the words. "A human saved. I saw something wrong," Marcus said quietly. "I acted. That's all." The Empress descended the steps from her throne, her gown trailing behind her like liquid starlight. She stopped directly in front of Marcus, close enough that he could see the faint patterns beneath her silver skin, the subtle pulse of her alien heart. "What is your name, human?" "Marcus Cole, your radiance, Marcus Cole." She studied him with those golden eyes, and he felt like every secret he'd ever kept was being read. "You knew that touching the sacred offering would mean death. Our laws are clear. Our guards would have killed you before you could explain." "I knew." "Then why?" Marcus thought about the question. He thought about the daughter he'd lost 3 years ago, a shuttle accident over Mars that had taken everything from him, including his will to live. He thought about how he'd drifted into this meaningless attaché position because he no longer cared what happened to him. He thought about standing in this alien throne room, seeing the slight wrongness in that wine, and realizing that for the first time in years, he cared about something. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally. "And because it's been a long time since I had a reason to do the right thing." Something shifted in the Empress's expression, a crack in that perfect imperial mask. "Ambassador Chen," she said, not looking away from Marcus, "your cultural attaché is no longer in your service." Chen sputtered. "Your radiance, I assure you, whatever punishment you deem, he will remain here, in the palace." She turned to face her court, her voice ringing with authority. "As my personal human advisor." The uproar was immediate. Nobles shouting, guards shifting uncertainly, the High Steward's face cycling through colors Marcus didn't have names for. Through it all, the Empress stood unmoved. And Marcus Cole, who had wanted to die for 3 years, suddenly found himself with a reason to live. 3 weeks in the Imperial Palace had taught Marcus that Valorians expressed discomfort through temperature. The council chamber was freezing, deliberately so. The 12 noble advisors who surrounded the circular table had lowered the climate controls to near-Arctic levels, a passive-aggressive reminder that humans were fragile, unsuited to their world, unwelcome in their halls. Marcus sat in his designated seat, notably the smallest, position nearest the door, and pretended not to notice. "The trade negotiations with the Kathrani Confederation have stalled," High Advisor Seleth was saying, her silver skin bearing the purple markings of the merchant caste. "They demand concessions we cannot provide. They demand we acknowledge their territorial claims on the Vespera system," another advisor countered. "Claims that would cut off 3 of our mining colonies." Empress Vayara listened from her position at the head of the table, her expression unreadable. In 3 weeks, Marcus had learned to watch her hands instead of her face, the slight tension in her fingers when she disagreed, the way they relaxed when she was genuinely interested. Right now, her fingers were drumming a slow rhythm against the crystalline table. Bored. Or frustrated. "What does our human advisor think?" Every head turned toward Marcus. The question had come from Lord Kethros, the Empress's uncle and the most vocal opponent of Marcus's presence. His tone made it clear he expected either silence or stupidity. "I think," Marcus said carefully, "that you're negotiating with the wrong people." Lord Kethros's skin flickered with amusement. "Oh, and who should we be negotiating with, human? The stars themselves?" The Kathrani Assembly's trade minister is a figurehead. The real power in their confederation is the Guild of Navigators. They control the jump routes. You're arguing about territory with diplomats while the people who actually move ships through that territory aren't even at the table. Silence. The cold seemed to deepen. "How would you know anything about Kathrani political structure?" Seleth demanded. "Because I read." Marcus shrugged. "Your archives are extensive, and no one told me they were off limits." He didn't mention the nights he'd spent alone in his sparse quarters, unable to sleep, drowning himself in Valorian history and politics because the alternative was drowning in memories. The archives had become his refuge, a way to keep his mind occupied until exhaustion finally pulled him under. The Empress's fingers had stopped drumming. "You read your archives." "Yes, your radiance." The archives require level 3 clearance. The terminal in my quarters has level 3 clearance. I assumed it was intentional. It hadn't been intentional. That much was obvious from the High Steward's expression. Someone had made an error when setting up his quarters, and Marcus had simply not corrected it. The human has been accessing classified information, Lord Kethros said, his voice cold with satisfaction. This is precisely what I warned. The human has done in 3 weeks what our intelligence service failed to do in 3 years, the Empress interrupted. Identify the actual power structure of our most difficult trading partner. She turned to Marcus, and for a moment, her mask slipped. He saw something underneath. Not warmth, exactly, but curiosity. Interest. You will attend me after the council session, she said. We have much to discuss. The Empress's private garden was the only warm place Marcus had found in the palace. It occupied a vast atrium at the heart of the royal wing, filled with plants from 100 worlds. Bioluminescent flowers cast soft blue light across winding paths. Small creatures, pets or pollinators, Marcus couldn't tell, flitted between branches that grew in impossible spirals. There stood before a tree Marcus didn't recognize, its bark silver like her skin, its leaves a deep purple that seemed to absorb light. My mother planted this when I was born, she said without turning. It is called a memory tree. Among my people, they are given to mark significant births. The tree grows with the child, shares their seasons. Marcus approached carefully, stopping at a respectful distance. It's beautiful. It is dying. She touched one of the branches, and Marcus saw what he had missed. The leaves were brittle, the bark cracking. It began to fade when my mother was killed. They say the trees know when those who planted them are gone. I'm sorry. About your mother. It was 7 years ago, Del. An assassination, poison, like what you prevented. Her hand dropped from the branch. The assassin was never found. My father died of grief within the year. I became Empress at 23, alone, surrounded by nobles who saw my youth as weakness and my grief as opportunity. She turned to face him, and Marcus realized this was the first time he had seen her without her court mask fully in place. Day. The golden eyes were the same, but behind them was exhaustion, loneliness, the weight of an empire carried by someone who had never expected to carry it alone. Why did you truly save my life, Marcus Cole? I told you. You told me it was the right thing to do. You told me it had been a long time since you had a reason to do the right thing. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the subtle perfume of the garden flowers clinging to her robes. But you did not tell me why you were seeking a reason. Why man would accept a posting on a world where he is despised, doing work that is beneath his capabilities, serving an ambassador who treats him as furniture. Marcus looked away, toward the dying tree. Some stories aren't worth telling. I am your Empress. I command you to tell me. You're not my Empress. I'm human, remember? The words hung between them. Insubordinate, dangerous. Any of her guards would have struck him for speaking to her that way. Vayara laughed. It was small, surprised, quickly suppressed, but real. Marcus stared at her, and she stared back, and something shifted between them. You are perhaps the only being in this palace who speaks to me as if I am a person rather than a symbol, she said. Do you know how rare that is? How valuable? Is that why you kept me here? To have someone who isn't afraid of you? I kept you here because you saw a poison no one else could see and acted without hesitation. Because you read our archives for knowledge, not advantage. Because she stopped, seemed to collect herself. Because in 7 years, I have not trusted anyone. And I find myself wanting to trust you. It is uncomfortable. Marcus thought about trust. He thought about his wife, who had left him after their daughter died because she couldn't bear to look at his face without seeing their child's eyes. He thought about the colleagues who had stopped calling, the friends who had drifted away, the long, slow slide into isolation that had led him here. "I had a daughter," he said quietly. "Elena. She was 9 when she died. Shuttle accident, a 1 in a million malfunction. The kind of thing that isn't anyone's fault, but feels like everyone's fault." He forced himself to meet Vayara's eyes. "I came here because I wanted to be somewhere that didn't remind me of her. I stayed because when I saw that poison, I felt something. Purpose. A reason to act. I hadn't felt that in 3 years." Vayara was silent for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. Her skin was cool, smooth, alien, but her grip was firm. "Real. Among my people," she said softly, "to share grief is to share strength. You have given me something precious, Marcus Cole. I will not forget it." They stood there in the dying light of the garden, 2 broken people holding onto each other's hands, and Marcus felt the first crack in the wall he had built around his heart. The assassination attempt came 6 weeks later. Marcus was in the archives when the alarms began, not the gentle chimes that signified a schedule change or visitor arrival, but the deep, pulsing tones that meant immediate danger. He was running before he consciously decided to move. The halls were chaos. Guards sprinting toward the throne room, nobles fleeing in the opposite direction, servants pressing themselves against walls to avoid being trampled. Marcus pushed through them all, ignoring the shouts and curses. He found her in the council chamber. Vayara stood at the center of the room, phase blade in hand, surrounded by the bodies of 4 assassins. Her silver skin was marked with splashes of dark blue, her blood from a wound on her arm. Her guards were dead, all of them, and more assassins were pouring through the shattered windows. "Marcus!" She saw him in the doorway. "Run! Get help!" He didn't run. Later, Marcus would barely remember the fight. He would remember grabbing a fallen guard's weapon, a phase lance he had never been trained to use. He would remember the way his body moved on instinct, muscle memory from a youth spent in Earth's underground fighting circuits before education had lifted him out of poverty. He would remember the strange calm that settled over him as he put himself between the Empress and her attackers. He would remember the pain when a blade caught his side, and the sound Vayara made, not a scream, but something worse, a sound of absolute terror that had nothing to do with her own danger. When reinforcements finally arrived, Marcus was on his knees, bleeding from 3 wounds, with 2 dead assassins at his feet, and Vera standing over him, her phase blade still raised, her golden eyes wild with something he had never seen in her before. "Don't touch him," she snarled at the guards who approached. "Don't you dare touch him. Your radiance, he needs medical attention. Then bring the physicians here." She dropped to her knees beside Marcus, her hands pressing against his wounds, her composure completely shattered. "Stay with me. Marcus, stay with me." "I'm not going anywhere," he managed. "Just need a minute." "You absolute fool. You idiot." Tears were streaming down her silver cheeks. Actual tears, something Marcus hadn't known Valorians could produce. "You should have run. I ordered you to run. You're not my Empress, remember?" She made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled him against her, heedless of the blood, of the guards watching, of the political implications. "You are now," she whispered. "Whether you like it or not, Marcus Cole, you are mine." The medical ward was quiet. Marcus lay in a bed that had been designed for Valorian physiology and was slightly too narrow for human shoulders. The physicians had done their work. His wounds were healing, accelerated by technology that still seemed like magic to him. But they had insisted on observation, and Vayara had insisted on staying. She sat beside his bed in a chair that was clearly meant for a servant, not an empress. She had refused to leave for 12 hours, had refused to change out of her blood-stained robes, had refused to do anything except hold his hand and watch him breathe. "You should sleep," Marcus said. "So should you. I've been unconscious for hours. That's close enough." She didn't smile. Her face was drawn, exhausted, stripped of every defense she usually wore. "The assassins were sent by Lord Kethros. My uncle. He has been arrested, along with 14 members of his faction. Your own family. He saw me as a temporary obstacle. A young woman alone, without allies, who could be removed and replaced with someone more pliable." Her grip on his hand tightened. "He did not account for you. I'm just a human. You are not just anything." She turned to face him fully, and Marcus saw something in her expression that made his breath catch. "Do you understand what you did? Not just today, but everything. You showed my court that a human, a species they consider barely sapient, would die for me when my own blood sought my death. You have changed everything, Marcus. The political calculus, the perception of humanity, I didn't do it for politics. I know." Her voice softened. "That is why it matters." She leaned forward, and for a moment Marcus thought she was going to kiss him. Instead, she pressed her forehead against his, a gesture he had read about in the archives, the Valorian expression of deepest trust, reserved for bonded pairs and sworn companions. "Among my people," she said, her breath warm against his skin, "this means I see you truly, and I am not afraid of what I see. It is not given lightly. It is never taken back. Vayara, you called me by my name." She pulled back slightly, and now she was smiling. "Small, fragile, real. In 6 weeks you have never used my name. It didn't seem appropriate. And now?" Marcus looked at her. This woman who ruled an empire, who had been alone for 7 years, who had found something in him that he had thought was dead. He thought about walls and how they crumbled. He thought about grief and how it transformed. He thought about a dying tree in a garden and a little girl who would never grow up, and all the reasons he had convinced himself he didn't deserve to feel anything again. "Now," he said, "it feels like the only appropriate thing." He lifted his hand, the one not tangled in hers, and touched her face. Her skin was cool and smooth, and she leaned into his palm like she had been waiting for this touch her entire life. "I'm broken," he said. "You know that. I'm not sure I can be fixed. I'm not looking for someone fixed." Her eyes met his, and they were shining with tears she wasn't trying to hide. "I am looking for someone real. Someone who sees me as more than a crown. Someone who would die for me not because protocol demands it, but because I can't imagine a universe without you in it." The words came out before he could stop them. "Vayara, I've been dead for 3 years. Walking around, breathing, but dead inside. And then I came here, and I saw you, and something woke up. Something I thought I'd buried with my daughter. Is that—" She hesitated. "Is that a human declaration of feeling? It's me telling you that I'm terrified, and I don't know what this means, and I'm probably going to screw it up somehow, but yes it is." Vayara closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was a peace in her expression that Marcus had never seen. "Among my people," she said, "we do not rush such things. We do not declare bonds lightly. We build them, slowly, over time, testing and growing and learning." She squeezed his hand. "I am willing to build, Marcus Cole. If you are, I'm willing. Then rest. Heal." She stood, still not releasing his hand. "And when you are well, we will begin." The coronation anniversary was the grandest event in the Valorian calendar. 1 year ago, Marcus had stood in this same throne room, watching from the shadows as Ambassador Chen presented his meaningless credentials. Now he stood at the Empress's right hand, dressed in robes that bore both human and Valorian design elements, a compromise negotiated over 3 months of careful cultural exchange. The throne room was packed. Nobles from every province of the hegemony, ambassadors from 17 allied species, and, for the first time in history, a full human diplomatic delegation, led by Earth's Secretary-General herself. "Nervous?" Vayara murmured, not moving her lips. "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "You? I am the Empress. I am never nervous." "Liar." Her fingers brushed against his, hidden from the crowd by the folds of his robes, and he felt her tremble slightly. The past 6 months had been a slow revolution. The fall of Lord Kethros had destabilized the conservative faction, and Vayara had moved quickly to fill the vacuum with reformists who saw the alliance with humanity as an opportunity rather than a threat. The trade negotiations with the Kathrani Confederation had concluded successfully, using the strategy Marcus had suggested, opening new routes that benefited both the hegemony and Earth's fledgling colonies. And through it all, they had built. Not quickly, not easily. There were nights when Marcus's grief overwhelmed him, when he woke gasping from dreams of Elena's face, and Vayara simply held him until the shaking stopped. There were days when the weight of rule crushed her, when the loneliness of the throne became unbearable, and Marcus sat with her in the dying garden, saying nothing, being present. The memory tree had begun to bloom again. New leaves, pale but strengthening. The gardeners called it a miracle. Marcus called it hope. "Citizens of the hegemony," Vayara began, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "Honored guests. 1 year ago I stood before you as an empress alone. My family gone, my trust shattered, my future uncertain." She paused, and Marcus saw her hands steady. "Today I stand before you, transformed. Not because I have grown stronger, though perhaps I have, but because I have learned the truth that my mother tried to teach me before her death, that strength is not found in isolation, but in connection. Not in walls, but in bridges." She turned, and the entire assembly followed her gaze to Marcus. "A human shattered the poison plate before it reached the Empress," she said, her voice ringing with controlled emotion. "A human saved my life. But what happened next was not shock, not for long. What happened next was something far more powerful, something that has changed the course of our civilization." Marcus felt thousands of eyes on him. He did not look away from Vayara. "What happened next," she continued, "was trust. Slowly built, carefully tended, tested by fire, and found unbreakable. What happened next was the revelation that the species we had dismissed, that many still dismiss, carries within it a capacity for loyalty, for sacrifice, for love that equals or surpasses our own." She extended her hand to him, publicly, formally, in full view of the entire hegemony. "I present to you Marcus Cole, hero of the Imperium, voice of humanity, and if he will have me, my chosen consort." The gasp that swept through the throne room was audible. Marcus looked at her hand. He looked at her face, at the fear and hope warring in her golden eyes, at the woman who had rebuilt herself from grief just as he had. He thought about walls and how they crumbled. He thought about the tree that had started dying when its planter died, and how it had begun to heal when new love took root in its shadow. He took her hand. "I will have you," he said, loud enough for his voice to carry. "Vayara, my Empress, my partner, my home." The silence stretched for one heartbeat, two. Then the High Steward, the same man who had called for Marcus's execution a year ago, raised his staff. "The Empress has spoken. The consort has accepted. Let the hegemony bear witness." The cheer that erupted shook the walls of the throne room. Later, after the ceremony, after the celebrations, after the endless parade of well-wishers and political maneuvering, they stood together in the garden. The memory tree was full of blooms now, purple flowers that glowed softly in the darkness, casting shadows that danced across the paths. "Your mother would be proud," Marcus said. "Perhaps." Veyara leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I like to think she would have liked you. A human? In her daughter's garden? A man who sees clearly. Who acts without hesitation. Who broke through an Empress's walls and refused to leave." She tilted her head to look up at him. "Yes. She would have liked you very much." Marcus wrapped his arm around her, marveling as he always did at how right it felt. How natural. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he admitted. "After Elena, after everything, I thought that part of me was gone. It was not gone. Only sleeping." She reached up to touch his face. The same gesture he had made in the medical ward, reversed now, returned. "You woke something in me as well, you know. Something I had buried so deep, I had forgotten it existed." "What's that? Hope?" "Hope." She smiled, not the controlled political smile of the Empress, but the real one, the rare one, the one she gave only to him. "You gave me hope, Marcus Cole. For my empire. For myself. For us." He kissed her then, gently, their first real kiss after months of building toward this moment. It was not passionate, not urgent. It was something deeper. A promise. A beginning. When they parted, the garden seemed brighter somehow. The memory tree's flowers had opened further, their glow intensifying. "The tree responds to emotional resonance," Vera whispered. "It always has. When my mother died, it felt my grief and began to fade. And now it feels something else." She laced her fingers through his. Something strong enough to bring it back to life. They stood together under the blooming tree, two people who had been shattered and had found in each other the pieces needed to become whole. Behind them, an empire waited. Ahead of them, a future uncertain but bright with possibility. And above them, the stars wheeled on, witnesses to something that had never happened before in all the long history of the galaxy. A human and an Empress, building something new, together.
¿Te portas bien, perro, eh? Pues. Ay, güey. Muy bien. Pa, ¿y tú? Bien, güey. Nomás que ahorita vamos a ir a la convención de anime, ya son las 9, güey. Y luego quiero ir a comer algo.
Jaja, no MMs, yo ando en clases.
Verga, Ian. Hijo de la chingada. O sea, vienes a ver un pendejo con traje de maid, güey. Vete a la escuela, cabrón. Ponte a estudiar, güey.
Se ha caído debajo la cam.
¿Cómo? No, ahí la dejé yo. Cámara, ahí voy para arriba. Vete a la verga, sí estoy enseñando mucha carne, eh. Ay, no, porque yo, puta madre. No, pero se me cayó mucho chore, se me está cayendo mucho. Cámara. A la verga, pinche colchonote. Ah, entonces me dormí en el piso, güey. Antes me dormí en el piso y estaba bien feliz, güey, en el pinche piso dormido.
Tanta carne y yo sin dientes.
¿Cómo, Ian?
Hola, bebé.
¿Qué onda, extra? Ahí voy para allá, güey. Me estoy limpiando el teléfono, cámara. Están ahí en esa posición, güey, porque tengo la montura allá en el carro, güey. Se me olvidó. Listos, ok.
Gerardo Mansión Reveal.
Como que mansión, güey.
Mames como que en el piso, ¿por qué o qué?
No sé, me dormía más a gusto en el piso, la verdad. Antes. Llevo como un año con esa cama, yo creo.
Así empiezan en el YouTube Naranja Wii.
¿Cómo? Espérame. Ay, no. A ver. ¿Cómo podría pasar menos vergüenza con esta putada, güey? Porque creo que no mames. Me queda.
Oliwi, ¿cómo va, Jerita?
Verga.
¿Qué aprendiste ahorita? Como olvidar todos esos momentos inolvidables que pasamos en la cama.
Pues
¿Qué
ya no vas a
rollo
la
algún
convención.
como estas comita dos sujum?
Verga. O sea, ¿qué onda, Alexa?
¿Te crees teriano porque te duermes en el piso?
A la costumbre, antes me dormí en el piso, güey. A ver, ¿listos? Porque si me va a dar la verga, güey. No sé por qué me pongo esto, güey. A ver. ¿Cuántos segundos hay de delay, güey? Debería ver mi mano ahí, ¿no?
I'm okay, how are you?
Ah, good, man. Debería ver mi mano ahí. Sí se ve, güey. No mames. No, vete a la verga, güey. No mames. No.
No me digas que te estás poniendo el traje.
No, ya lo tengo
Ja, ja,
puesto.
ja.
Ya lo
Te
tengo.
ves bien rica, mami. Y esa guapa que se
Mira,
asoma.
mira. Mira. Ah, perro, güey. No traigo zapatos, o no estén chingando, güey. No, ¿por qué tanto delay, güey?
El James va a estar bien emocionado si te ve. Yo vine a divertirme, no a excitarme.
¿Qué onda?
Ja, 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 a ver esa waifu.
Ay, no, güey, lo que tenemos que hacer es que irnos a la verga, pero en putiza, güey. Porque no sé si va a venir alguien
me
ahorita.
vengo.
No, pero mira, güey, pinche
Is
chorro,
that
güey.
the outfit for the anime convention?
Yeah, that's the outfit, güey. Mira. Está cabrón.
¿Ya cuánto la hora, mamá?
Pero ya sal, güey. Güey, pero mira, se mira de la verga, güey.
Too well.
Mira, me veo divina. Mira, está mamadísimo,
No
güey. No mames,
lo
güey.
peor de todo es que te queda bien.
Me veo divina, güey. No mames, güey. Mira, con los calcetines, güey. ¿Cómo? O sea, me queda...
Este stream debe tener la etiqueta de cuidado excitan aquí.
Mira.
Uf, apenas me voy a bañar.
Estoy mamadísimo. ¿Cómo? Lo que no me voy a poner son estas mamadas, güey. No sé, no me gustan.
Ay, te ves divino.
Ay, sí.
Frutitas, jajaja. Ajá, hinche pirata. Hola, amor, ¿a qué horas pasas por el pan? Puede ser mi vieja.
¿Cómo? O sea, mira, estas mamadas no sé, güey. No, y no voy a poder controlar el celular, güey. No, creo que estas mamadas no me las voy a poner, güey. No. Ay, tú.
Mejor sin los guantes, pero
Sí.
con las orejitas.
Mira, o sea, sí están los guantes. No me gustan cómo se ven. Están de la verga.
Oye, te falta la peluca. ¿A cuánto la hora, güey?
¿Cuánto traes? ¿Cuánto tienes, güey?
¿Cómo dijo Adam Sandler que rico hoy me manoseyo?
Las orejas son estas, lo supone. No me las he visto, la neta. Pero ahorita no me las voy a poner. Espérate. A ver, cámara. Verga, güey, pero... No mames.
Te hacen ver muy femenino. Ja, ja, ja. Esos
Vete a
guantes
la
parecen de los que usan
verga.
para hacer exámenes a las vacas Hasiach.
Y estas pinches orejas culeras, ¿qué, güey? Están de la verga. No, no me quedan las
De
orejas,
aquí
güey.
van a salir varios clips.
No me quedan las orejas, güey.
Un pollo y di que te fue bien.
No me quedan las orejas, güey. Me quedan de la verga. Me siento como un furro mayor, güey, con las pinches orejas. Me las voy a llevar.
NMMs pareces embarazado, güey.
Ya sé, güey.
Allá es primer mundo, haz esto en la TAM y no te salvas apa XD. A ver las orejas, acercad.
Pareces una